did he come from?
That would have been impossible on the high school track team at home. But here, I'm just cheating.
Honestly, that's probably the most accurate line in the entire anime. Not because the fights are unfair, not because the villains are weak, but because the show itself keeps cheating. It cheats conflict, it cheats character growth, it cheats storytelling. Within the first couple episodes, our main character is already being called.
Look, I don't want anything to do with nations, politics, or the hassle of making alliances with a bunch of spirits. Truthfully, I don't care about any of it.
That's not how the potentially strongest man in the world should talk. Good grief, that is such a waste of talent.
He unlocks all his abilities immediately, forms contracts with the legendary spirit, receives new powers whenever the plot asks him for them, and somehow, despite all of that, I was still bored. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think an overpowered protagonist automatically ruins a story. Some of my favorite anime have characters who are absurdly powerful. The difference is, those stories still force the characters to struggle, sometimes emotionally, sometimes morally, sometimes through impossible choices. Power isn't the problem, the lack of conflict is. And that's exactly where Isekai Cheat Magician falls apart, because this anime constantly introduces interesting ideas. A summoning ritual, a world built around spirits, political conspiracies, forbidden magic, civil war, dragons, and a secret mastermind. On paper, that sounds awesome. But almost none of the ideas matter because the main character never drives the story. Instead, things they sort of just happen. The plot moves because someone off screen made a plan, because another coincidence happens, or because Taichi randomly unlocks another ability. By the end, it doesn't feel like you're watching the main characters make decisions. It feels like you're watching a checklist being created. Going into the show, I honestly didn't know much. I knew it had a reputation for being one of the most generic isekai. The punching bag of isekai, you could say. I knew the main character was overpowered. That's given in this genre. And, well, that's really about it. So I figured maybe people were being a little bit harsh. I've seen plenty of shows get labeled generic, even though they're still entertaining. Maybe this would be another one of those. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Here's the weird part. I don't even think being generic is the show's biggest issue. There are dozens of generic fantasy anime that are still enjoyable because they execute the basics really well. Strong character writing, clear progression, meaningful stakes, a story that actually builds towards something. Isekai Cheat Magician struggles with all of those. Instead of feeling like one connected story, it feels like multiple different ideas stitched together. Every few episodes, there's another new threat, another new mystery, another new villain, another new power, and somehow, none of it feels earned. Everything just keeps moving because the script says it's time for the next event. The characters aren't steering the story, they're just along for the ride. And nowhere is that more obvious than with our main character. Let's start with Taichi, because this is where almost every other problem begins. Now, like I said earlier, being overpowered isn't inherently bad. Some people like Saitama, some people like Anos, some people like Rimuru, because those stories and characters understood something this one doesn't. Strength isn't enough. You still need conflict, you still need growth, you still need something for the audience to invest in. Taichi doesn't really have any of that. Almost immediately after arriving in this new world, the guild tests his magical aptitude. And instead of just being talented, he's basically told, "Congratulations, you're the strongest person alive." Then, they explain his magical capacity. Over 120,000. Everyone else? A fraction of that. Now normally, I'd expect this to create some tension. Maybe he's difficult to train. Maybe controlling that much power is dangerous. Maybe using it comes with a cost. However, nothing really happens. The solution is basically, wow, you're amazing. Even the numbers don't really mean anything. The show tells us 10,000 is enough to become a royal mage. Taichi has over 100,000.
My magic capacity is 120,000?
Yeah, that's what your aptitude test shows. And your magic strength is 40,000, which means your potential is very high.
Humans who possess a capacity of over 10,000 and a strength over 2,000 are eligible to become royal mages or...
Okay, cool, why should I care? Those numbers don't tell us anything, because we never actually see what they mean. It's just another way for the story to say, our main character is special. Then, we learn about spirits. Mages borrow power from spirits to control elements, fire, water, earth, and air. Sorcerers directly use them, and sorcerers are incredibly rare. And they're normally stronger than mages. And guess what Taichi is? Of course, he's the rarest class in existence, a summoner. Because why stop at making him incredibly powerful when you can just make him one of the rarest people on the planet? Every time the story needs him to overcome another obstacle, another ability appears. It's like the writers look at every difficult situation and asked, what if Taichi was just stronger? Instead of, what would Taichi actually do here? There's a huge difference. One creates character development, the other creates stronger punches. He's handed power-up after power-up without really earning any of it. Training, skipped, failure, extremely rare, meaningful setbacks, almost non-existent. Even the one time, and I literally mean one time, singular time he loses, it's because the story is setting up his next power-up. Taichi gets completely overwhelmed during a fight with an ice elemental, and for context, the only reason he loses this fight is because it's immune to physical damage. Fair enough though. Finally, a real obstacle. Then almost immediately, a spirit comes and saves him, giving him her power. Problem solved. Instead of overcoming the challenges through something he learned, the story simply upgrades him. That's not growth. That's software patch notes. The same thing happens again later. In version 1.7, episode 7, Anna pushes him out of the way of a massive blast from a twin-headed dragon, costing her life. Anna dies, which, for a guy who's overpowered, he should be able to dodge this, but that's besides the point. This moment is probably one of the most emotional moments in the entire series, because she's one of the few characters who actually felt like an actual person. Her sacrifice has weight. For a brief moment, it feels like Taichi has experienced genuine loss. And then, he immediately unlocks another level of power. Again, instead of grief fundamentally changing who he is, it mostly changes how hard he hits. Emotional moments don't exist to develop characters. They exist to justify the next power-up. And because Taichi keeps getting stronger so effortlessly, the fights stop being interesting. Think about almost every major battle. Are you worried whether Taichi will lose? No, not really. Are you worried how he'll outsmart the opponents? Again, no, because the battles never become a battle of wits. It always becomes who hits stronger. The anime even introduces a rival that could have challenged this idea. The white-haired mage is probably the best example. Unlike Taichi, he says he worked for his strength. He says he trained. He says he struggled. He says he spent years improving. There's a genuinely interesting contrast here. Natural talents versus hard work. That's a classic conflict. And for a moment, it almost feels like the show is going to explore it. The rival even calls out Taichi. He basically says,
if our powers were equal, then hard work would give me the winning edge. Of course, the ability to apply yourself is a strength spoiled brats like you never develop.
What? You think I haven't done any hard work?
That's ridiculous. You haven't got the faintest idea what kind of effort is involved. I've put in a huge amount of time developing my skills, and you dare to compare your level of commitment to mine?
And honestly, he's kind of right. Taichi didn't earn his absurd power. The show kind of just hands it to him. Now, the rival isn't exactly a great person. He was the one to summon the ice elemental, and he said some awful things about Rin and Mossbrain. But his score argument is still valid. What he does is he uses an artifact to make their magic power the exact same, nerfing the main character. There's something there. Unfortunately, the anime never really explores it. Instead, Taichi wins anyway. Again, simply because he's stronger. Not because his worldview changed, not because he grew as a person, not because he realizes his position. He has a flashback and wins their clash.
Use your will. Imagine your magic power manifesting.
That's it! I have to visualize the outcome!
And that's ultimately why Taichi never became an engaging protagonist. It's not because he's overpowered, it's not because he never trained, and it's not because of his cookie-cutter personality. It's that he never earned being overpowered. The audience never watches him climb that mountain. We meet him at the top. The show spends less than 5 minutes in total showing the main character ever training. When your character starts at the finish line, there's no journey left to follow. So, let's say you disagree with everything I just said. Maybe you like the way Taichi was handled. Maybe you don't mind Taichi getting stronger every couple episodes. That's completely fine, because I don't actually think that's what kills the anime. The real issue is what the story does, or more accurately, what it doesn't do, with that power. The answer is, not much. One of the easiest ways to see this is by looking at the show's structure. Think about how the series progresses. The characters arrive in another world, then they register as adventurers, then they investigate missing fruit shipments, then they have to fight to protect the city, then a mastermind is revealed, then a dragon suddenly appears, then they're dragged into a civil war, then an even bigger mastermind is revealed, then suddenly we're talking about ancient spirits and world-ending threats. On paper, those all sound like they could have been interesting story arcs. The problem is that they don't naturally build into one another. It feels less like a story that's escalating and more like someone spinning a wheel every episode. Compare that to most fantasy stories. Even if the destination changes, the protagonist usually has a clear objective. Maybe they want to return home. Maybe they want to get stronger. Maybe they want to defeat the Demon King. Whatever it is, there's a through line. Every arc feels like another step towards that goal. However, the through line barely exists here. Early on, Taichi says he wants to find whoever summoned them, and eventually return home. Great, that's a solid motivation. So naturally, you'd expect the story to revolve around investigating the summoning, following clues, meeting people connected to it, learning why they were chosen. Except, it doesn't. Instead, the show immediately sidetracks itself. The characters become adventurers. Fair enough, that's pretty standard, but almost every major event after that is because someone else, not because Taichi chooses to pursue something. Take the fruit investigation. The guild tells them there's a shortage of Milia fruits because the supply wagons keep disappearing. So, they take the job. Not because it helps them to get home, not because it reveals anything about the summoning, just because. It's the next mission. You could say that they accepted the quest because it's Rin's favorite fruit, and that the sudden price increase makes them want to investigate it. However, that creates another problem, because if the guild never offered them the quest, they would have never gone on it in the first place. As a result, most of the story wouldn't have happened after that. Anyways, while investigating that, they stumble upon a smuggling operation, which leads to assassins, which leads to monsters below the city, which lead to a civil war. Every time one mystery becomes interesting, the show introduces another, without properly resolving the first. That resolves in every arc feeling disposable. Nothing has room to breathe because the show is already sprinting towards the next event. One episode we're dealing with monsters, the next, a two-headed dragon wakes up. Why? Because someone asked for it to get involved. Okay, but from the audience's perspective, it feels completely random. There's barely any build-up, no gradual escalation. The dragon just exists because the story wanted a cool boss fight. And once it's defeated, we move on. Just like that. The dragon isn't a natural consequence of previous events. It's another obstacle dropped into the plot. Then the series pivots into politics. Remember earlier when Taichi literally said that he doesn't want to get involved in political affairs? That's actually one of the most relatable things he says. He's been dragged into this world. Of course he doesn't want to get dragged into the politics of kingdoms he doesn't care about. So what happens next? He gets dragged into the politics of a kingdom he doesn't care about. Almost immediately, in fact. And here's what's frustrating. It's not because Taichi changes his beliefs. It's not because he slowly realizes innocent people need help. It's not because he makes a difficult moral choice. The story simply places him there. The king explains the situation, the rebellion begins, and now he's fighting in a war. His earlier decision doesn't matter because the plot was always going to ignore it. Almost every major turning point comes from someone else making a decision off screen. The guild gives them another mission. The villain launches another attack. The kingdom asks for help. Taichi mostly reacts. He's not driving the story, he's riding it. Think about your favorite main character. Their decisions fundamentally change the direction of the show. Sometimes they make terrible choices, sometimes their choices backfire, sometimes they create entirely new conflicts. But the important part is that the plot moves because they acted. You couldn't just drop in a random person and they would make the exact same choices. Think about it this way. If Subaru and Rudius were dropped into each other's worlds, Rudius would likely struggle far more in ReZero than Subaru would in Mushoku Tensei. Subaru placed into the world of Mushoku Tensei would have magic, opportunities to train, and the chances to grow steadily stronger. Rudius, on the other hand, would be thrown to ReZero without return by death because there's no way Satella would love his ass. In Isekai Cheat Magician, you could replace Taichi with almost every strong protagonist, and most of the story would still happen. That's never a good sign, because the protagonist should be irreplaceable. The story should only exist because of the choices they made. The story isn't progressing simply because new things happen. Progression happens when events naturally grow from previous events. When characters make decisions that create new problems, when every arc feels like another step towards the ending. Here, the story mostly moves because it's time for the next episode, and that becomes painfully obvious once we learn who's supposedly behind everything, because that's when all the events suddenly become part of one gigantic master plan. Except, the more you think about the plan, the less it makes sense. After 11 episodes of monsters, dragons, politics, rebellions, assassins, and secret organizations, the anime finally reveals that there was supposedly one person orchestrating everything from the shadows, the unnamed mistress who we will call Shade for absolutely no reason at all. This is clearly meant to be a big aha moment, the moment where everything seemingly unrelated suddenly clicks into place. And at first, I actually wanted it to work, because if there's one thing the story desperately needed, it's a unifying explanation. Unfortunately, the more you think about her plan, the less it makes sense. Let's walk through what had to happen for this master plan to succeed. First, the princess had to successfully summon Taichi. Except she didn't. The ritual partially failed. She accidentally summoned Rin too. Already the plan is off script. Then Taichi and Rin had to survive being dropped into an unfamiliar world. They easily could have died before reaching the first town. Instead, they immediately are rescued by adventurers. Lucky coincidence number 1. Next, they have to decide to stay in the kingdom. Nobody forces them to. They could have gone anywhere. Instead, they remain exactly where the plot needs them to. Then, they become adventurers. Again, almost entirely by choice. If they'd become merchants, or traveled independently, or simply left the city, most of the story never would have happened. Then the guild just happens to assign them the fruit investigation, which just happens to cause an assassination attempt. That investigation just happens to expose the monsters below the city, which causes the dragon to fight Taichi, causing Anna to die, which just happens to give him a power-up, which pulled Taichi into a political conflict, which put him into the final battle. Do you see the problem? Most of this is something Shade can't control. She's supposedly a master strategist, but almost every step of her plan depends on completely random people making the exact decision she needs them to make. That's not strategy. That's buying one lottery ticket and winning every single jackpot. Imagine if the adventurers hadn't rescued him. Plan ruined. Imagine if Taichi didn't trust Mueller. Plan ruined. Imagine if Taichi left the country. Plan ruined. Imagine if Taichi had simply declined the guild quest. Plan ruined. Imagine if Taichi killed Anna or never got close to her. Plan ruined. Imagine if Anna's sacrifice didn't awaken more power. Plan ruined. Imagine if Taichi lost his fight to the dragon. Plan ruined. Imagine if he actually stuck to what he said earlier and refused to get involved in politics. Plan ruined. The entire scheme depends on events that the villain has absolutely no way of predicting. That's what separates a smart villain from a lucky one. The story simply tells us she's behind everything. There's a difference between the villain causing events and a villain being credited for events. This anime does the second one. Just because you reveal someone was behind everything doesn't automatically make your story deeper. The audience still has to believe that they could actually pull it off. And me personally, I never did. When I first started Isekai Cheat Magician, I expected another generic isekai. Nothing amazing, nothing terrible, just another fantasy adventure. Instead, I got something so much more frustrating, because hidden beneath all of those cliche ideas is something that could have actually had potential. A magic system built around spirits, a protagonist trying to understand another world, a mysterious summoning ritual, even Anna's sacrifice. There are moments where you can see the outline of a much better story, but almost every time the anime introduces one of those ideas, it immediately rushes to the next one. Taichi never really earns his victories, the story never lets him fail. The biggest disappointment isn't that Isekai Cheat Magician is generic. There are plenty of generic animes that are still fun. The disappointment is that the characters rarely drive the story. They're passengers, not drivers. Things don't happen because Taichi makes meaningful decisions. Things happen because the next episode needs to happen. And that's why, despite having dragons, ancient spirits, political conspiracies, secret organizations, civil wars, I was still bored. Because spectacle can keep your attention for a few minutes, but meaningful storytelling can keep your attention for a whole 12 episodes. Before I wrap this up, I do want to give the show credit where it's due. Anna's death is genuinely the emotional high point of this series. She's one of the few characters who genuinely felt grounded, and her sacrifice was more emotionally impactful than anything else in the series. I was genuinely excited to see them dance together in the special. It gave me butterflies in my stomach. I just wish it had been allowed to matter more, instead of immediately being used for Taichi to unlock a new power. If the anime had slowed down, let its characters make meaningful choices, and trusted them to drive the plot instead of relying on coincidence, I honestly think there was a decent show somewhere in there. Unfortunately, that isn't the show we got. Before I end this video, I do want to say one thing. I got a question on Twitter, follow me on Twitter by the way, do I think there will ever be a perfect anime? And the answer is, I don't think there will ever be a perfect 10 out of 10 anime. And honestly, I don't think there will ever be like a true 1 out of 10 either. Every show has something. Maybe it's a character, maybe it's like an interesting idea, maybe it's a story, maybe it's a few moments that stuck with you. On the other side of the coin, every show fails in one area. There are anime with incredible characters but weak plots. There are anime with 10 out of 10 world building with 1 out of 10 main characters. That's kind of my philosophy when making these videos. I'm not looking for a perfect anime, I'm not looking for a reason to hate something. I'm looking at what a show is trying to do and whether it succeeds at doing it. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and comment what anime I should cover next. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.